everyone, and welcome to the third in a series of HE Innovate webinars. This webinar will explore different online teaching and learning approaches that are being adopted by higher education institutions, and we're delighted to have you all here. My name is Rebecca Allenson, and I work for Technopolis as part of the HE Innovate team with Zsuzsa Jaworka, and I'll be your moderator for this session. HE Innovate is an initiative of the European Commission and the OECD, helping higher education institutions explore their innovative potential. We know many of you that are attending will be subscribers to the HE Innovate news, and if not, please do sign up. Before introducing today's webinar and my housekeeping, I just want to mention the poll once more to you, because we'd like to find out a little bit more about you. So we've just stuck up there, so can you please tell us what you do? And we'll leave that up there for a few minutes until everyone has had a chance to vote. So on to the housekeeping. Today's webinar is being recorded. We welcome your questions and your comments, and there is a live Q&A where you can enter your questions for the speaker at any time, and you'll probably find that at the bottom of your screen, or you may have to find it in your devices if it's not a computer. So please feel free to put any comments that you like throughout the webinar. We're going to have some time after each of the main speakers for questions and answers. And if you have a particular speaker in mind, please feel free to indicate that by name. We'll summarize some of the chat comments, and our speakers will also look at the questions at the end of the session. So we hope there will be no technical issues, but if they occur, we'll work really hard in real time to fix them and ensure a smooth webinar, but any apologies in advance. So today we have an exciting lineup for you, and I'd like to welcome our guests. We first give a warm welcome to Moira Maguire and Jerry Gallagher. Moira and Jerry work in the Centre for Excellence in Teaching and Learning in Dundalk Institute of Technology, a higher education institution of about 5,000 students in the northeast of the Republic of Ireland. Their roles include supporting both teachers and students in the many aspects of learning and teaching, which has been particularly important during the current pandemic. In their presentation, they will share some of their experiences of the move to remote teaching and assessment. So following on from Moira and Jerry, we will have Ruth Kerr from the Frederica Web Learning and Alessio Kaviki from the University of Macerata, and I'll tell you more about them later. So let me hand over to Moira and Jerry.
Thank you very much, Becky, and hello everyone, and thank you very much for inviting us to share some of our experiences of the move to remote teaching. I expect some of these will resonate with many of you. So I'm just going to share my screen, and again, fingers crossed that everything works as planned. So hopefully we're up and running now. So just to say, just about this time 10 weeks ago, Moira and I were in a meeting at our institution where it was announced that we would be moving online the next day. And I suppose, as with many others, the suddenness of this change came as quite a shock to us, really. Not least because although we would have a number of blended or online programs in our institution, the vast majority of our programs are taught face-to-face, albeit supplemented by technology such as Moodle, our virtual learning environment. So a change to fully online was quite a step for our institution. And I suppose in a way that move online was a bit like cycling off the edge here, not really sure where we'd land or where the journey would take us. But I suppose as we look back now, like most institutions, we've moved through three main stages on the journey. The first one was that move online, with the focus on making the landing as soft and as manageable as possible for our students and staff. After that initial few weeks then, once the online delivery was in place, it became clear that it became clear at that stage then the final exams couldn't take place. Then the attention shifted to the assessment process and trying to guide and support colleagues in designing alternative assessments and in supporting students to prepare for these. And I suppose at this stage now, that process is coming to an end as our colleagues are grading the assignments and the assessments. And now we're beginning to look to next semester and prepare for it. And I suppose we're still, as in many institutions, we're still quite unsure of what that situation will be. but we're assuming that it will be at least blended, if not fully online. And I suppose that's the challenge now as we prepare for that unknown situation next semester. So Moira's going to speak briefly about the principles that will have guided us over the last number of weeks.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Jerry. I guess like all education providers, we were forced to innovate really quickly. It's suddenly changing the delivery model. And I suppose it was helped by the fact that at least we did have a very clearly defined problem, although obviously it was a bit harder to find solutions. I suppose we felt it was really important to focus on the context, and that our role was very much that of supporting our colleagues to identify solutions to their specific needs and that work for them, and to help them to implement them. So there was an incredible variety of responses, from really very simple things, and for some colleagues going online at all was very new and very innovative, right up to really amazing things people did, including running really complex hardware labs online. So what was important in that was identifying some principles to guide the whole process. And these were very much around emphasizing and articulating the shared values and goals that we have as within the institution, focusing on our local needs and local constraints, and trying to keep things simple, and also leveraging our strengths. So I suppose just to flesh that out a little bit, we're a small institution and we have relatively small class sizes, and something our students consistently tell us is that they really like the friendly, approachable lecturers, the supportive environment. That's something they really like, and that's built up very much from the face-to-face contacts. Of course, shifting online was a real threat to this, but it also turned out to be quite a strength too, because having had those supportive relationships, feedback from students and staff indicates that they helped us to move online a lot easier. So that's something we're very much looking at when we're planning for next year. And we had a shared focus on student success. So that was really helpful. So I'm going to hand back to Jerry now, who's going to tell you a little bit more about the approaches.
Thanks, Moira. And I suppose guided by these principles, and you know, our approach has involved a number of different elements, but all of them have been, you know, focused on helping students and teachers navigate through what for many is a very unfamiliar terrain. And the first part of our approach, I suppose, was to devise good practice principles and guidelines. And we looked to the literature for these, we looked to our own experiences and to the many resources that colleagues around the world generously made available. But in doing so, we were really conscious that we shouldn't overwhelm students or our colleagues, you know, who are extremely busy and who didn't have time to read through a range of resources and tips. So our first task was to really filter these and devise a manageable set of principles and guidelines. And in doing so, we focused on a number of key areas at each of those three stages that we mentioned. Of particular importance, I suppose, was the idea of building confidence, firstly around the technology, then around the online learning, and then around the assessment process, all of which was changing rapidly for students and staff. So we provided a range of resources and workshops. And of course, as we know with technology, not everything goes well, and there would have been a few bumps in the road along the way. One particular example that happened as early on, we realized that a lot of our colleagues were very interested for the first time in holding. We organized some workshops in Big Blue Button, which is a virtual classroom that some of you may be familiar with in Moodle. So we sent the link to our colleagues and expected about 30 or 40 to attend. However, as the session went on, we ended up, the numbers kept increasing to the point where there was 130 people on it. And then all of a sudden, as happens often with technology, Big Blue Button ground to a complete halt. So it wasn't the best way really to inspire confidence at the outset, but I suppose the good side of it was that it was a good lesson for our colleagues, in the sense that they could see that things do go wrong, even for those of us who are kind of relatively experienced with the technology. Things do happen and there are bumps on the road, and we did learn from that ourselves. We limited the numbers for the next session. But all of this, I suppose, was around providing support and advice to all the groups in the college: students, colleagues and teachers, and also the management team. And for students, this included how to prepare and engage for online learning and assessment. For the colleagues, it was about redesigning their learning and assessment practices. And then for management, it was about advising them around issues related to the process. And throughout that process, we saw ourselves very much as advocates for both the students and teachers. For students, in terms of the various issues that many of them faced in trying to work online, things like IT and connectivity issues, personal circumstances, specific learning needs. For our teacher colleagues, we felt it was important to highlight the significant efforts that they were making in that move online, and in particular, the increased workload that was involved in changing to online delivery. And again, these will continue to guide us as we move into the next year. And just maybe finally, just to share with you a few thoughts as we look back over the last 10 weeks. Institutions such as ours, or maybe even the whole higher education sector in general, is often criticized for moving slowly in response to change. And I think what this crisis has shown is that we can actually change rapidly, particularly when we need to and given the right drivers. And what we've seen, and I'm sure lots of our colleagues have seen it in other institutions, in making that change, many who never expected to do so or even thought they could, they've shown an amazing capacity for creativity and innovation. I think even surprising themselves. And I think the driver there has been that they've done this primarily for the good of their students and their students' learning. And only last week, Moira and myself were in a meeting with a senior colleague who's been teaching for many years in the institution, and he mentioned that he never ever expected in his teaching life to teach a live online class, but that he did have to do it in the last number of weeks, and he was particularly delighted he managed to do it, and actually that it worked really well for him. And I think there's a really positive note for the future. In terms of the technology then, in our centre, we would have always stressed that technology is very much just a tool or a catalyst for the learning, and that, of course, pedagogy is primary. But what we've seen in the changeover is that while that is the case, initially for many of our colleagues and for our students, technology was the most important concern as they tried to grapple with it. And I suppose that wouldn't be at all unexpected, really. But I think now we're at a stage where we might now move naturally out of that stage and into one where we're focused on the pedagogy primarily now, and how best to use that technology to enhance learning. One thing too that has struck us in the last 10 weeks is the importance of ongoing communication and interactions with students and colleagues. I suppose this can be challenging in an online or a work environment, that's online as well. But those small interactions that we sometimes take for granted are really proving to be so important for well-being. And of course, that's going to naturally have a knock-on effect on the learning process. And I think we're beginning to appreciate these all the more now, since we've moved into this new environment. And finally, I think it was Winston Churchill who said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." And I think a crisis such as this does present us with lots of opportunities. For example, I hope it will have caused many of us to reflect and reconsider our practices, particularly, say, around how we design the learning activities and how we approach assessment. And from a learning and teaching point of view, I think that would be one of the very positive outcomes of the current situation. So Moira, I'll hand back to you, maybe just to.
Well, I think that's really what we have to say. This is just one example of the kind of responses happening in all education institutions, and this is how our context influenced our response. But we hope there's a few points there that might resonate with people. So we'd just like to very much thank you for your time and for listening to us.
So thank you ever so much, Moira and Jerry, for that overview. We have 4 questions up already.
Oh.
for you. And as you can imagine, 3 of them are around the issue of assessment, which is a very hot topic, and we're going to have a future H Innovate webinar specifically on that as well. So they're around sort of examples of resources that you're using for online assessment, you know, and is that more close-ended to save some of the teachers' time? And how do you know, I'd like to know how to assess students while dealing with online teaching, and could you share some useful tips or software again that we can use to assess our students? And how did DKIT deal with the assessment processes? For example, how are the usual time constraints and exams being handled? And there's one other question, so I'll just wrap those assessment ones up together for you to answer, about have you changed the format of your lecture delivery onto an online format? Is it more of a flipped approach?
I'll just take the assessment first. There was obviously a great deal of anxiety around assessment when it became clear that exams wouldn't run as many modules, would have some proportion of exams. So I suppose we put, at the level of the institution, we put together a process where colleagues were asked to look at their modules and revise the learning outcomes, to look at how the learning outcomes that had not already been assessed, that remained to be assessed, how they could be assessed using an alternative format. So we focused very much on looking at alternative assessments, and we provided quite a bit of training and support around that. So that took the form of webinars, guides and so on, but we also worked quite closely with individuals around, and with small teams around what they were planning. We very much encouraged people to go an alternative assessment route rather than an exam route, for various reasons. One being that, well, certainly from our perspective, the main one was around the students. The students at home can't replicate exam conditions. Many of them, you know, don't have a clear space to study or reliable access to devices and so on. So we were very concerned about that aspect of things. Also, students who have learning agreements and might have a reader or a scribe during an exam, it becomes much more difficult to accommodate that. So quite a lot of people chose alternative assessment. So in some areas, though, that was difficult, and what they did was more like a remote exam. So what would happen would be the exam would be released at a certain point in time, the students would have time to work on it, it would be longer than the usual period, and then they would put it up. But again, generally people changed the questions somewhat so that they were more focused on application and interpretation rather than on, you know, description or you know, any kind of rote learning. So essentially the approach was to change the assessments, and we didn't have a proctoring set. We don't have an online proctoring system, and there are difficulties, I think, for students around that, especially at the moment. So that was very much the approach that was taken, but there was a lot of leeway for people to deal with what they need to do, what they needed to do in the individual circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, thank you. There is an additional question that's been put to us, is the looking at the difference between assessment and evaluation as far as teaching is concerned, and I don't know if that's something that resonates with you. Another question is related to the equipment with the right tools, you know, and did any of the teachers have particular problems with internet connections or computers that you had to deal with?
It's interesting, it came back from the student feedback that sometimes in terms of teaching and learning, we were actually surprised because we expected the students to talk about their own connectivity. There are big issues around rural connectivity in Ireland. And yes, students had problems, but they also talked about their lecturers having very poor broadband and that causing big issues with sound quality. So again, that's something that we're having to look at very much in terms of going forward for next year. And that was something we didn't really expect so much. In terms of tools for the lecturers, and Jerry would be able to answer better than this and me, again, we try to encourage people to stick to tools they were familiar with, and importantly that the students were very familiar with. Our students are really keen on our VLE, they seem to really like it, so we tried to encourage people to stick to things that people knew how to work and that we had quite a bit of in-house support for. I don't know if Jerry would like to add there.
Yeah, well, just to say, yeah, when we did move online, what we did was we set up a Moodle module that all staff had access to, and that's where we made the resources available to staff. But we focused there, as Moira said, on a small number of tools that that we thought would have the maximum impact. Now, some of our lecturers would have been familiar with them, but others who weren't, we just want to keep that set of tools as small as possible. And that would keep it manageable. And the other thing that we tried to encourage was sort of consistency across modules. So when students were involved in a number of modules on the same program at the same stage, that there would be some consistency in the tools that were used. And some people will have used a mixture of, in fact, most people will have used a mixture of live classrooms and asynchronous activities, if you like, or offline activities. And I think that was really positive. And I think the feedback from students was that they liked that mixture. They liked they wanted access to learning materials on Moodle. They liked the idea of having, say, recordings or screencasts available that they could play and pause as they wished in their own time, and they appreciated the flexibility of that. And then they did like the live classes where they had a chance to talk to the lecturers, hear their lecturers, maybe even see them, and also some of their colleagues or their peers in their classes. And I think they really did value that as well. So, and that was sort of important around the whole idea of keeping the connection going and that relationship going between students and their peers and students and their lecturers.
We're running out of time here, but we have another Q&A at the end as well. But I'm just going to say two of the questions that are here. One is, if you use the open book exam approach. And the second question, I think it would be nice for all of the panelists to take later, because I think it's a huge one about student dissatisfaction on the online learning approach, and perhaps looking forward to the new academic year when you've got new students coming into a university, because I know that you mentioned that you had students who were already involved with being in the university, and you had experience with them face-to-face before they went online, and perhaps that's going to be more challenging. So if we could take that one later, because I think it's a bigger one, but could you just answer on the open book exam approach? Is that something that you used?
Well, in encouraging our colleagues around the idea of the alternative assessments and making a wider window for students to submit their work and so on, our focus was on suggesting open book type exams. Now, at that point in the semester, a lot of the exam papers would already have been set and would have been reviewed by examiners. So what we suggested that people maybe would go back and look at their exam papers if they did want to work off those, that they could go back to them and maybe look at maybe changing the questions slightly to remove the lower level knowledge type questions that could be maybe Googled or just copied and pasted, that might be acceptable in a traditional exam setting, but wouldn't really work in an open book setting. And so that's what we advised our colleagues. And then Moira would have run a number of sessions for students around how they might approach those open book exams. And I think that would have been that was really important, because students were quite unsure and a little bit stressed about that process.
Well, thank you very much. And so just to reiterate, in 2 weeks' time, we have another HE Innovate webinar specifically on assessment and exams. So many of you, I'm sure you would all love to come to that as well, so you're all invited. So I'd like to thank you two for that first presentation. And we're going to move on now to Ruth Kerr. So Ruth has a background in online language teaching and instructional design, and has been with Federica Web Learning for 10 years. She project managed the EMMA, the European Multiple MOOC Aggregator Project, and more recently worked in internationalization at Federica, building networks and partnerships for knowledge sharing and capacity building, and organizing international conferences and events like eMOOCs 2019. So just to say, Federica EU is one of the infrastructures analysed during the HE Innovate country reviews in Italy. And so more information on that can be found in the report on the HE Innovate site, and we will share a link about that in the chat. So thank you, over to Ruth.
Thank you, Becky, for the introduction. And it really is a pleasure and a privilege to be invited to join you all here today and to represent Federica Web Learning. Federica started life as a European project on e-learning at the University of Naples Federico II, creating and exploring the digital ecosystem for learning. And back in 2007, when we started, that was really quite new. And so that's kind of our story, really. Research-based innovation, following and defining trends in online learning, and coupled with an open mission to bring quality university courses from a public university back into the public domain. and then to scale up that operation. Our original university platform for the delivery of open courseware had totaled about 5 million visits by 2013. But then Federica took the strategic and possibly brave decision to move into the MOOCs universe and embrace an institutional MOOC policy in 2015. And with that came a new platform too. This led to massive development for Federica. Federica Web Learning became a university centre for innovation in multimedia learning and is now a MOOC provider with a portfolio of over 200 courses, and it's often included in the world's top 10. Southern Italy, the city of Naples, it wasn't an easy context. It wasn't a very stable context to introduce a project on e-learning into. And also bringing innovation into a university as traditional as the local one wasn't easy either. And 2015, which was the year we moved to MOOCs, saw the closure of a lot of university service centres in southern Italy. So we're very grateful that our vision and our strategy has matched with European and regional development goals to increase digital education, to provide a more flexible and inclusive offer, and to valorise the role of the university within the local and national context. And so this has given us the funding to be able to go forward. I also prepared just a couple of slides to help me tell our story. So I'm just going to do that now. Can you see that okay? Yeah. So here we are, Federica, and these are the 4 areas that I just want to cover briefly this afternoon. And the main slide here is some of the major milestones along our evolution from university project to MOOC provider. And you can see from here the early days, iTunes U, then the move to MOOCs. And you can see also that over the last few years, there's been massive development with important partnerships created for external MOOCs with national and international universities, important new partnerships with companies and organizations. We also have, in 2019, so quite recently, a big orientation drive to help Southern Italy try and bridge that gap between school and university and try to reduce dropout rates at university. And you can also see down at the bottom, but then Becky already mentioned that, our organisation of large-scale events in the field. And then here are just some screenshots from our website. I could have just linked the website and taken you there, but I was just slightly anxious about the technology, and so I just did the screenshots. But you can go to federica.eu and see all of this for yourselves. As you can see, we have an English version of the website too, Federica in numbers. And then here on this slide, you can see the main pillars of our strategy, the main focus of Federica activity, our keywords, and then orientation, university, and perhaps just hidden by one of the speakers, at least on my screen, Federica Pro, the professional strand of our activity. I'm going to move that down for a moment. And so, central to Federica's strategy, and there are just a couple more things I'd like to mention. The first one is our use of Italian language. Multilingualism is really key to European identity, we think, and UNESCO's published plenty about the importance of mother tongue instruction. And so we've kept with Italian in contrast to the cultural, perhaps, domination of the English language on many of the major MOOC platforms. Another thing, like Jerry and Moira, we use our own platform a lot. We do have some courses on edX and on Coursera for a broader reach, but we do generally tend to use our own platform. And of course, this has very important ramifications for data and research using student data and keeping that data in Europe. And the last thing, I did mention this already, the institutional MOOC policy, but if we look at the number of universities that are participating in MOOCs, there's about 900 in all the world, but most MOOC production lies in the hands of actually very few institutions. That is, that many universities do 1 or 2 or 3 high-end products to attract students to their university campus, but not many have open MOOCs which are actually curriculum MOOCs from their own university. Now, I think this is the question that people wanted me to put a little more emphasis on, which is how MOOCs are helping Italy during the COVID emergency. And that was also the title that we gave to an article that we published in the Times Higher Education. It's obviously true that the transition of all teaching and learning activity to the online environment and the confinement of many sectors of the population to their own homes, many people who are doing smart working, it has led to a massive renewal of interest in MOOCs in Italy and throughout the world. I'd like to show you a slide, so I'm just going to move that. So maybe it's better if I do it in the presentation mode. So here we are, sorry about that. The other one didn't seem to want to work. So yeah, I was saying that it has led to a massive increase in numbers throughout the world. I just collected this from Class Central MOOC Observatory, showing the figures for April. We can see Federica there in 5th place and a 200% increase shown there for the number of sessions on our platform. And in fact, in March, it was even greater, but Class Central didn't publish that, but our own figures showed that we had a 400% increase. So I'm just going to come back and can we just analyze for a minute this success of MOOCs? So China were there before us. MOOCs were very, very key to their disrupted classes, undisrupted learning initiative. They had 25 MOOC platforms offering 24,000 university courses used for free throughout the country. But at Federica, we believe that the success of MOOCs during COVID is only a reflection of the success of MOOCs pre-COVID, actually, when there were already 110 million users on 15,000 courses. And the factors maybe that explain this success, well, I think the first one is the fact that people can follow courses from top-notch teachers from some of the best universities around the world for free, and that's attractive. And then MOOCs are asynchronous, which I mean simply means that they're put together, they're produced in a different moment from when the learners actually use them. But that means that we can guarantee that there's good alignment between the learning objectives, the expected learning outcomes and the assessment, and even the materials too. I mean, if we want to put a video in, we can film it nicely and pay attention to the scaffolding of the learners. We can even factor in some interaction and social activities. So this is obviously better quality than anything that we can produce in an emergency, in a rush. And perhaps a third important factor is that MOOCs are modular, stackable. I mean, it sounds a bit obvious, but they are ready-made blocks, building blocks of quality material, quality content, and so they don't have to be used as a course, but they can be used as separate modules as and when we please. So what did we see happening during the COVID crisis? Well, first of all, MOOCs were used as an alternative to synchronous learning, to streaming. It helped overcome the digital divide because we still have quite a lot of families where 3 children were sharing one computer to do all their schooling online at the same time. So MOOCs were used as an alternative for the digital divide, and even sometimes for professors who felt much more confident and comfortable using pre-prepared lessons. We then saw MOOCs being used as asynchronous content within a flipped classroom model, but all totally online. So the teacher presence bits through Microsoft Teams quite often, but also Google Classroom and Zoom, as we are doing here. MOOCs were studied by the students whenever and wherever they wanted, and then the class time in video conferencing was used for discussion and further learning or sorting out issues. And of course, the last point about the modules, we saw a massive increase on the part of Federico Secondo teachers using Federica MOOCs, but we also saw that Federica MOOCs were being used throughout Italy and even beyond as the asynchronous content.
Ruth, we've got some questions here related to reducing dropout rates, and I wondered if you could tell us how successful Federica was at reducing dropouts, and how you might be using that student data.
Well, I mean, that's a big question because, of course, dropout rates to really measure successfully the knock-on effect of an initiative that started in 2019. I think it's early days yet. But basically, in terms of orientation, we thought that MOOCs could probably help in three ways. And the first one is to give students a good impression of what studying that subject, whatever subject they thought they might like to go and study at university, it would give them a reasonable taste of what it would feel like to be on a course at university doing that subject. And I think it does. And hopefully that means that students are less likely to choose the wrong thing. I mean, if you know what's involved, if you know what the teaching is going to be like, if you have a better idea of what you're going to be asked to do, then maybe you can make a better choice. The other thing is that to actually get through the first year exams, because that's often when students tend to start dropping out, in Italy at least, and that's because the standard, the academic standard, is a bit tougher than people originally anticipated. And so we feel that a different kind of MOOC can prepare students for the level of difficulty in those kind of make or break subjects that they might have difficulty with. The third thing is, on a personal level, there's quite a lot of MOOCs around these days, and we're thinking about this also quite carefully, that prepare you for life skills, because sometimes making a decision about what to study at university or whether to go to university or not, there are different factors at play that may influence you, and having good self-awareness, good self-knowledge can help you to make a more reasoned decision, and therefore perhaps eliminate dropout, which stems from those three things. So choosing the wrong subject, not being able to do the subject, it's just too difficult, or actually finding that studying wasn't for you, or studying in that way wasn't for you. I don't know whether that answers the question. We are going to be using student data. We are going to be following this quite carefully, but it is early days, I think, to be able to you know, look at something so vast and to say this helped.
Brilliant. So we've got some other interesting questions for you, but we have we're running a little bit behind time. So what we can do is probably get you to answer those in the chat later, or we can come back to them. So thank you ever so much for that. Really, really interesting to hear about what you're doing with Federica. And I'm sure, as we said, you can read more about that on the HE Innovate Country Review. I'd like to move on to our third speaker now, on to Alessio Kaviki, who is Professor of Agribusiness, Rural Development and Branding at the University of Macerata. He has been an invited expert for several programs and DGs of the European Commission in the agri-food sector and for the UN World Tourism Organization. Alessio has coordinated several EU projects, including the Knowledge Alliance's The Wine Lab and the Strategic Partnership Food Biz, both related to multi-stakeholder engagement for regional development in food and wine sectors. He's a scientific coordinator of the MOOC Sustainable Food Systems, a Mediterranean Perspective, released by SDG Academy, Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and Berea Center for Food and Nutrition. Hand over to Alessio. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Zuza, for your invitation for the coordination of this webinar. I'm really pleased to be here, and I think I will bring a different perspective from my colleagues. First of all, because I'm not a pedagogist. I don't know specific pedagogies to work on MOOCs. I have only a learning, an experiential learning approach to this this tool, to a MOOC. I would like to start from my story that is a bit strange, because well, my adventure is the adventure of a researcher, an agricultural economist, in a small region, almost unspoiled and unknown region of Italy, Marche, where I teach since 2015. I had a background in consumer behavior and food marketing, and then I realized that it was not very useful for the territory I had there. Because in 2007, 2008, the crisis has been really challenging for many companies, and they started to knock the doors of the university to ask for a different kind of help, a different kind of contribution to regional development. And so I had to take part to several workshops and experiential learning activities in order to coordinate and to facilitate local stakeholders. Moreover, in 2016 and 17, we had several earthquakes. Probably you remember the earthquakes in central Italy, in the central Italy. And so what I had to face was a sort of wicked problem that is common when you have to deal with sustainability issues. Previously, Ruth as well mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, and I think it's important to keep in mind that when you have to teach in a region that is very rural, you have to consider several different sectors that are combined together even within one company. So you have the agritourism facility and you have half farmer, half hospitality manager. So you have different needs, different competencies and knowledge. What I realized was that we were working on problems that cannot have a definitive solution. And so you always need to find a collaboration between different stakeholders. This is also part of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of Agenda 2030, particularly the SDG number 17 is related to multi-stakeholder engagement and the multi-stakeholder partnership, so partnerships for the goals. And it seeks to encourage and promote effective public, private, and civil society partnership, building on the experience and on the resources that you can find in a territory. And this can happen at regional level, but also at global level. And for this reason, we decided, first of all, to take part to some European projects funded by the Erasmus Plus program. And these projects, mainly the Wine Lab and Food Beads, were related to co-creation in rural areas. And we have developed together with local farmers and our partners all around Europe, some didactic material, some teaching material that is online now in our websites. But our common approach was working on project and problem-based learning, location and service-based learning. Consider when you have an earthquake and you feel the necessity to help local farmers through your teaching activity, or doing research whilst you are trying to help them. So action research, experiential learning were the new focus for me, for my research team, and for many colleagues in my university. At a certain point, I realized that this kind of work as a facilitator, so having the university as a facilitator of different relationships in the territory, could become something global. And in fact, I was asked to be the director of this MOOC, Sustainable Food Systems and Mediterranean Perspective, by the Sustainable Development Solutions Network Mediterranean that has its headquarters at the University of Siena. I would like to launch this brief, short trailer that maybe can help us to understand which kind of issues we are dealing with when we talk about sustainable food systems. Zuza, can you launch it?
Yes.
Please? Thank you.
Let me just share my screen with you.
Yeah, I can stop sharing mine. This one is a MOOC that currently is on the, now it doesn't stop in my computer, so that's perfect. Now this webinar is on the, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So it's on the website, on the platform of EDX. And it's a webinar, it's a MOOC on, that has been created thanks to the partnership between different public and private partners. I'm going to show you these partners, who they are. So Sustainable Development Solutions Network, the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition, that is a foundation, and SDG Academy, that is the academy of scholars and professors and researchers who are dealing with sustainable development goals linked to the Agenda 2030. This was a global partnership because UNIMED, the Association of Universities in the Mediterranean, as well took part to this initiative under the PRIMA program. PRIMA program is the Initiative for Research in the Mediterranean. So it was already an international partnership. And more recently, the FAO has been included and took part to the development of this platform. So we are dealing with sustainability starting from the history of agriculture to economic issues, rural development, the problems related to fisheries and cultivations, and then with an outlook on future professional profiles. And so also the FAO material has been included. So my point is that we have a MOOC on sustainability. Nowadays, with the COVID and the coronavirus, the topic of sustainability is even more popular. But what can we do with this MOOC? Which kind of use we can do of this MOOC? And so the first point was, my idea was to use it as a multi-stakeholder engagement. And the first chance we had was the Erasmus Plus virtual exchange last year. Now the program is going to start again next week at European level. And the MOOC is this basic material that is used by more than we have already enrolled for this edition, 5 weeks edition, more than 400 students from all around the world, particularly from the basin of the Mediterranean. And well, this is a pilot. Erasmus Plus Virtual Exchange is a pilot project, and it is implemented by this consortium. They contacted us because the MOOC could be interesting for this scientific and learning diplomacy between different countries in the Mediterranean. And well, the rationale for the Erasmus Plus Virtual Exchange is both looking to politics and education. So on one side, you use these courses as a way to facilitate encounters, meetings between different cultures. On the other side, it's also a way to increase the internationalization, even of small universities, and the digitalization of these universities as well. What is practically this Erasmus Plus virtual exchange? You have an interaction between different students who are attending the course, so they can learn in an asynchronous way, so they can attend the MOOC on sustainable food systems by themselves, and then they have weekly meetings where they can discuss among them in a platform like this. So you have this sort of round table. You can have a dialogue with the other participants, and you can have a real sharing of experiences. In our case, for the University of Macerata, this has been an important novelty because we decided to adopt to give the chance to our students, to our PhD students, to take part to this MOOC and to take part to the Erasmus Plus Virtual Exchange. That means starting also for PhD students to become autonomous in order to find their destination for researching during their 3 years period of PhD. On the other side, the second option to use a MOOC like this, well, it's a tool for online problem-based learning, because during this emergency, during this COVID-19 period, we had to work at home, of course. We had the smart working, and we decided to use the MOOC as a scaffolding for the interaction between our farmers who took part to our lessons on Microsoft Teams and our students. Usually, we try to ask our students to be a sort of consultants of our farmers. So they have to work on problem-based and usually location-based learning. It was not possible this year. But we had all the topics that are faced by this MOOC as a basic knowledge for students and our stakeholders. Starting from these, stakeholders come in class, in our classroom, virtual classroom, they ask to solve some problems, and students have to face the problem with a dialogue, a continuous dialogue with them. So the MOOC and the modularity, as Ruth was saying before, was important also to address specific problems of our stakeholders. The last solution, the last option, was to use the MOOC as a scaffolding material as well for summer school, for the summer school that is held in Siena, the Summer School on Sustainable Development, that is proposed and organized and designed by different stakeholders, by a public-private partnership between the university and many different private companies and associations that are involved in the sustainable development. So this was my basic. I'm sorry we couldn't see the video, we couldn't watch the video, but I'm sure there are other solutions to use a MOOC like this, and I would be curious to know even your experience, your direct experience on the modularity and the way that a tool, a didactic tool like this, can become a facilitator of a collaboration of. For instance, in the case of sustainability, but of collaboration within the context of regional development. So if you have examples, I'm here to learn as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much, Alessio. And just to say that Zsuzsa has posted the link to the YouTube video in the chat, so you can do that afterwards. And just a quick question to you around I think because everyone's very interested in the feedback or assessments, and do you have that from the first edition of the Erasmus Plus Virtual Exchange?
Yes, students from the first edition, considered that this is a piloting. Well, they were happy because it was something completely new. The best thing, some of them, was to listen and understand the different points of view on the topic of sustainability, because what you feel as an issue in sustainability in a developed country is not the same in a developing country. And so even being around the same virtual table, round table, to discuss about these topics is an important experience. So this is the way also to start learning about different cultures and to share opinions of people from different backgrounds. So it was more, the feedback was more related to the experience they were doing instead of the content they were dealing with. But it was fun to see that some of them started to collaborate together after the last edition. So I think it's a good experience. I would like to stress this point. When I promoted this MOOC today on Facebook, I had a comment from a colleague of mine. She was saying, look, Erasmus Plus Virtual Exchange, we cannot hear something like this. It's very strange because our habit is to have a real Erasmus Plus experience. But in my opinion, you cannot compare the two experiences. Here, it's a different tool that maybe can help those who cannot travel, for instance, or those who want to make an intercultural exchange. Well, this can be helpful for them. So it's a different way, and we have to think differently when we deal with such tools.
There was a question earlier for Ruth related to whether you can provide virtual mobility within Federico web learning for universities outside Italy as well. So I think it's a very important topic. We are, and the clock is ticking, everyone, I'm afraid to say. But I wondered if maybe a very brief reflection related to the issue on the student dissatisfaction. And so institutions expect to fall in student numbers in September because they realise it won't be part of a traditional campus learning experience.
I would like to say just very, very briefly that Federica produced a guide to MOOCs and online learning for an Italian audience during COVID, which led to a new major initiative called Insegnare Online, Teaching Online, with a series of webinars and articles on our blog, and indeed a course which feeds in to help teachers as much as we can do the best we can with what we have. We're at the moment surveying students to see what kind of response we're getting. I think for the minute it looks like we're very happy. It was better than nothing. COVID is what it is, and there was no option. But I think there will be some preference for classroom too.
And Terry,
yes, I just might add there, I think that there seem to be reports from all around the world that there's concern that student numbers might drop, you know, in the new year. In our institution, we don't know just yet, but there's no doubt that some students much prefer the face-to-face experience and the full-time face-to-face experience than the online. Now, having said that, some students really enjoy the online experience, and then some, you know, I think there's a whole spectrum of experiences there. But there is concern, I think, right around many colleges that the numbers may fall, and I suppose that's something, as I say, we won't really know until September.
Have to deal with it. Well, just for all of you who have posted questions, thank you ever so much. And if you would like to pass on any additional questions to speakers, please send them to us at info@heinnovate.eu, and we'll put that into the chat. I'd like to thank everyone who's joined today's webinar, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I think that some of those practical insights that you've given us, these new forms of online learning and the use of MOOCs, are very inspiring, and they pose a number of interesting questions. I think challenges that we're going to be facing for the next year or so, you know, to start with, to try and sort out. And these experiences of coming together and actually trying to exchange on our ideas, our challenges, our opportunities is hugely important. If you have any other additional questions outside of those for the speakers, or want to connect directly to the HE Innovate team, you can do that through the same email address or through the website or on Twitter or LinkedIn. And we will also take away these key points from the discussion and make that available in a short article on the website. So as I announced earlier, our next webinar will be on the 4th of June at 5 p.m. Central and Eastern European time, on the very important topic of assessing skills and exams in uncertain times, challenges and opportunities. And this is something many of you, as we know, are tackling exactly right now. So more information will be made available on the HE Innovate early next week. So on behalf of the HE Innovate team, I'd like to thank you once again for all of your time. To our speakers, absolutely brilliant presentations today. And we look forward to seeing you again, and have a wonderful rest of the day, everyone. Goodbye.